Welcome to another edition of our unique NUFC podcast. In a week of mourning for Her Majesty the Queen, most of football will return at the weekend, united together to pay respects. Newcastle United are back in action in a fascinating fixture that pits Eddie Howe up against his former Chargers. Welcome to Black and White with Arab News. Today's guest is a regular and always a first choice on the Black and White pod team sheet. But before we catch up with Liam Kennedy, it's a warm welcome to co-host and sports editor of Arab News, Ali Khaled. Ali, we get back to the domestic fixture list this Saturday, a good old-fashioned 3 o'clock kickoff, and the Toon will be looking for maximum points.
I think so, yeah. I mean, we were discussing last week how, while the performances have been good, there's been a bit too many draws. Obviously only one defeat, which was only a few seconds away from a draw as well. So in that sense, it's good. But they haven't won since the opening day of the season, which was a very, very comfortable win. And I expect this one to be similar to that match against Nottingham Forest. I would expect Newcastle to win this quite comfortably. I think obviously Bournemouth have improved since the 9-0 against Liverpool. But still, I think with Newcastle at home, this should be a comfortable win, I would think, for Newcastle.
Nothing less will do. Liam, welcome back as man on the ground in the Toon. What's your feeling on possible returns for key players?
Cheers, Pete. Cheers, Ali. It's great to be back. I think it would be really important to get players like Bruno and Alan St-Maximin, potentially even Callum Wilson back to the team, because I think games like the last one that we saw played, which was Crystal Palace, when Newcastle United did everything but score, it felt like on the day, that little edge of quality that someone like Bruno, Alan St-Maximin can bring to the side, or an extra option like Callum Wilson, could have made all the difference, and I imagine would. And I think it's been said, it has been said to death by anybody and everybody, but it rings true. If you take the quality of somebody like Bruno Guimaraes out of the team, any team in the Premier League would struggle. And I take that all the way up to the very elite in the league, because he is that good. He is a top class Premier League footballer. I think if you pull him back into that midfield, which has been lacking, not for want of trying or effort, it has been lacking. If you bring that back in, then as Ali mentioned before, you start turning some of those draws into victories. I think Newcastle so far this season, for me, the signs are really, really positive. The manner in which they've gone about their games, they had a much better, more fruitful run at the back end of last season, where they won a lot of games that were very tight. You go back to last minute wins against Leicester, really tight games like that one. There was lots of them when Newcastle United were second best in games, but still managed to eke out a win. This season's been very different. You go back to Wolves, which is a tough game. And that was a ones each. Newcastle United dominated possession, dominated chances, dominated field position. They did so for around 45 minutes, I would say, against Liverpool, dominated in terms of in terms of chances created and threat at the other end. Newcastle United never did that at all last season against anybody, no matter where they were in the division. They're dominating games now. Crystal Palace from minute 1 to minute 90. You could argue that maybe 5 minutes in that whole period of 90 minutes, Crystal Palace had the better Newcastle United. It was a dominant display. And of course, you mentioned back to the Nottingham Forest game. Newcastle United are a total different unit this season, who are possession-based, who keep the ball, use it and create bucket loads of chances. It's just now that final bit. Have they got that quality to turn those chances into goals and into wins? They've got smatterings of quality, but what I would argue is it's a 60 to 70 minute game for Newcastle United. They've got a really good team, but then they have to change things, and you're bringing on Chris Wood, you're bringing on Jacob Murphy. They haven't got a squad. They've got a good team when everybody's fit, but they haven't got a squad. And that's probably where I would sort of judge it so far and say they probably will fall short of challenging the established European elite this season. But it won't be because of the quality of the team. It'll just be because of injuries and in a really compacted schedule with a split season, or because if you lose 2 or 3 of those players, as they have in the last few weeks, and they have continued to get results, it's not a negative. But if you take those 2 or 3 bits of real quality out of the team, St-Maximin, Wilson, Bruno, it's tough. any team would miss it, and Newcastle United really miss it because the players coming in aren't quite of that level.
Absolutely. Nailed it, really. I mean, you look at it, it is circumstance, is fact as well. In the fact, take a couple of players out like that, and you're right, you're going from having some of possibly the best midfielders in the Premier League to others who are good squad players, but not at that level. Ali, I wanted to come to you as a man who knows the club well that I'm about to mention. Transfer activity last week, only at Newcastle. They let Dubravka go, and then, of course, all of a sudden, they have a keeper crisis of their own. So Mr. Karius comes in, a man that you know well, obviously remembered for certain errors, which is unfortunate, but that goes with being a goalkeeper. What can you tell us about him?
It is very unfortunate that he's only remembered for that, you know. I mean, obviously what people forget was that halfway through that season, he took over from Mignolet at Liverpool. So this is the 2017-18 season, which really, after Christmas, is when Klopp's team really came together. It was Salah's first season. They'd had a few issues defensively, and they brought in Virgil van Dijk at Christmas, in January, straight after Christmas, and Mignolet was dropped, and Karius took over. And for the most part, he did okay. He was genuine. I mean, he was involved in some incredible European games. There was a 3-0 at Anfield against Manchester City, who were flying that season, you know. And I remember he played really, really well in that game, you know. Liverpool won 3-0. And then in the return game, they won 2-1 at Manchester City. And then he played in the semi-final against Roma. So he was genuinely improving. And, you know, I mean, obviously in hindsight, all anyone remembers is that final. But, you know, a lot of people were happy with him at that point, you know, got to the final and all that. Obviously, what happened in the final is almost, I don't know. I mean, if this had happened in a league game, maybe you get over it and, you know, people will forget, you know, a few memes, a few jokes online and all that. But it happened in the Champions League final and he never really recovered. I mean, I genuinely feel sorry for him. But he is, I mean, there was the making of a very good goalkeeper. And, you know, I mean, Klopp wouldn't pick him, you know, on sentiment or anything other than the fact that he was doing really, really well. And that was, like I said, that half season was excellent. After that, he, you know, obviously he had a couple of loan spells, one of them in Turkey. He's never really settled anywhere, and it haunts him. So I personally am very, very happy for him. You know, I mean, I think everybody deserves a second chance. I mean, I know he's had a couple of chances on loan and all, but I think this is a fresh start for him. I think he's, you know, the Liverpool contract's over, you know, it ran out. So he's not tied down and there's not that negativity about it. So I think having him as a backup keeper, is a good decision. I mean, I think it's you know, the club, you know, it's a win-win for the club. You know, I mean, having someone who has played at the high level. Let's not forget that. You know, I mean, again, it's really hard to get away from those two mistakes in the Champions League final. But you know, this guy is, you know, played in Champions League quarterfinals, semi-finals, final against the best teams, and was actually quite good for the large part. So yeah, and you know, he's no longer a young man either. You know, I mean, it has been 4 years since he joined, and you know, he joined and he was, you know, he's 29 now, so quite experienced as well.
Good around to have the club. Liam, someone else who's joined the club this week, someone I could probably do with myself, is a nutritionist. Joined the ranks. He was with England Rugby, Chelsea and Fulham, a specialist, and Andreas Kasper is at NUFC, something Eddie's been searching for a while. So I would say that probably signals another positive move as well.
Yeah, very much so. I think there's a real idea that Newcastle United need to beef up the staff that they had behind the scenes, and Eddie Howe's really making his mark at the football club now at all levels. We're seeing a big redevelopment at the training ground, only a stone's throw from where I record this.
Yeah,
and it's quite incredible when you see the plans, the changes, the amount of rooms and seats in order to fit all these extra staff in. I've already spoken to a few people who are involved there in and around the press team, and they're already wondering, will we even be kicked out because there's so many staff coming through the door? It's quite an incredible transformation. I want to go back to just what Ali was talking about there with Karius as well. Yep. See, it's almost like we live in this sort of social media generation and people are really keen to judge, but it's really good to listen to someone like Ali who's seen him week in, week out, understands how good a goalkeeper he is. And I see these Newcastle fans who sort of turn their noses up and say, oh, I can't believe we're doing this. You mention it, it is a win-win. When have Newcastle United ever had a goalkeeper who's played in a Champions League final? Ever?
Yeah.
There hasn't been. We've had some amazing goalkeepers at the football club in recent years, even Tim Krul, Shea Given being easily the best, and Martin Dubravka, a very good goalkeeper. But Loris Karius has played at the highest level, high pressure situations. Yes, he's made mistakes. There were mitigating circumstances in that final. Of course, he took the knock to the head, didn't he? And then there was a total concussion. So let's not judge him on one game. Let's judge the guy on who's had a good career. And I would actually go as far to argue, for all Newcastle fans doubting this deal out there, is that he's probably a better goalkeeper than Carl Darlow, who is the backup now. So I don't really think anybody can turn their noses up, or anybody's got a right, really, at all, to sort of complain about the Karius signing. And I hear people say, well, this was the worst squad move ever, getting rid of Dubravka, allowing Manchester United to have Dubravka for virtually nothing. Think about what Eddie Howe is building here. Eddie Howe is building a squad of players who are buying into the project, who want to be here. It's my understanding, the minute that a goalkeeper came through the door, this summer with Nick Pope, who was only ever coming to be number one because he's got eyes on the World Cup squad in November, Martin Dubravka was unsettled and his agent was asking around for moves elsewhere. So realistically, is Eddie Howe going to be happy keeping a player like that on the bench, needing to call upon him potentially if Nick Pope gets an injury, knowing that his head's not in the right place? Not for me. I think it was the exact right call. And bringing a goalkeeper in Karius, who's actually played at a much higher level consistently than even Martin Dubravka, is a, as you mentioned, a win-win for everybody.
And I think also, Liam, he's happy. I think, he's happy to sit on the bench. I think, and be a backup, again, for someone who's had quite a lot of experiences. Yeah, some of them not great, but who's had his tough times and is looking to come back. To get someone of that caliber, or someone who's at least always had the potential to play at the highest level, and be happy to be a backup goalkeeper to Nick Pope. I mean, again, on a short-term contract, it makes sense, And just one more point to touch on what you said again about like social media and the criticism that they get. I mean, I tend to forgive fans quite a lot more than I forgive the press sometimes, And I think like the English press sometimes, if somebody fails, I realize Karius failed like on a major stage and all that, but it's almost like there's no way back for them in the English game, you notice it with managers, you notice with certain players. A player has a big money move, comes to England, doesn't really work out, and he's forever a failure, and same with managers, and it's happened over the last 20, 30 years. While in Europe, like managers fail and then they get other jobs, they move between top clubs, players, might not work at what club, they go somewhere else, they rebuild their careers, they get back into the international team, and here, I mean, in the UK, I should say, the UK press, there tends to be just stuck with the tag of failure, and that's why, I'm so pleased for Karius, and look, Eddie Howe knows what he's doing, I mean, there's no way Eddie Howe has not looked at this, from every angle and realized this is a really good move for player and club, So again, very pleased for the player, and people deserve a second chance. And it was 4 years ago, and hopefully he's gotten over that. That Champions League final.
Something else, gents, that no one's really mentioned is the great experience to have around the club. And Eddie's big on that. He's big on what goes on in training. It's all together, and I think it's great. So moving on, Ali, we featured Keith Hackett last week. Wow, really explosive, wasn't it, with Keith?
Yeah,
brilliant.
It's very good.
Love to speak to Keith. And as chance would have it, of course, Callum Wilson did his podcast just earlier this week as well, and he covered VAR, and he actually said something that I didn't really realise, that Lee Mason, who's the dedicated VAR ref now, or whatever it's called, he visited all the clubs at the start of the season, and he said, as he came to Newcastle, that referees would be more lenient and more understanding. And he echoed our sentiment that VAR is sucking enjoyment out of the game. Callum Wilson said that on his pod with his West Ham colleague as well. Just to go back to that, that's something we've been saying for a few weeks now, and it's starting to crop up more and more amongst ex-pros, current pros, that VAR is sucking the enjoyment out of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of us, including myself, we're quite happy with VAR when it first came in. I think, like, in theory, it will make things better. And I'm sure there's been many cases where it has. I mean, we don't remember all the correct calls. Let's not forget that. There are many, many correct calls. But
one hand, mate.
But I mean, what happened this past week, or sorry, 2 weeks ago, shall we say? I felt like it was a tipping point. Keith Hackett said it's the worst refereeing that he's ever seen in that week. The reaction to it, even considering how the criticism that VAR has gotten over the last few years, even considering how every week we talk about nothing else post matches, I felt like this was like just one step too far, And I know a lot of people keep saying, look, it's not VAR, the system, it's the people who operate it, clearly, But at the end of the day, that's an irrelevant point. We're still not getting the correct decisions. We're still getting all these controversies. So, I mean, something has to be done. It can't go on in the English game the way it has been. We mentioned how in other places in Europe, they don't seem to have the issues that England seems to have. And I'm not sure why. I mean, our people there have a little bit more common sense. I have no idea why this just keeps happening week after week in England. And the inconsistency it's not even inconsistent. It's just always bad, I mean, it's, I mean, something, Keith Hackett mentioned, close Stockley Park, which I thought was brilliant, and he goes, bring them into the stadium.
Just close it.
He goes, close Stockley Park, bring like the VR into the stadiums. Something's got to be done, because I feel like it is sucking the enjoyment out of football. We talk about nothing else, post-match, week after week, there's less and less talk of, tactics, and less really sort of looking into the game. And all the post-match analysis seems to focus on VAR.
I've got to ask Liam then, from someone who goes to the presses, and something that cropped up last week, when you look at David Moyes versus Eddie Howe, do you think Eddie could be a bit more critical of VAR? How does it come across? And second part of that question, is what Ali says correct? Does VAR end up taking up so much of your press conference when you want to ask Eddie about team news and games going into the weekend?
So what I would say is, I have seen Eddie Howe take a certain little bit of criticism from certain angles recently with regards to his dealing of decisions that have gone against Newcastle United. Of course, you see high-profile managers, big characters through the years in the dugout who would come out and really go for it and criticise. David Moyes did that, of course. We've seen the likes of Alex Ferguson do, I'm not talking VAR here, but Arsene Wenger, big characters who would come out and
probably really, just as well VAR wasn't around in Sir Alex's day. That'd
be amazing. Some of the expletive-ridden press conferences and interviews you would get then. But no, I think Eddie Howe probably could be a bit stronger. I think he walks a delicate line. It's not in his character to be that way. There are people around the dugout who are like him. On the issue itself of VAR, and you talk about do we really know why these bad decisions keep happening? And I think it's obvious. And I'll just go back to a recent Newcastle United example. There's a couple, actually. One of them was the Crystal Palace one. There was a re-refereeing of the decision. The goal was given. Then the angles that were shown to the official when he was able to see it again, and when they were monitored in Stockley Park, were every angle but the one that actually showed the shove and the momentum and going into the goalkeeper. It was a re-refereeing. It was selective re-refereeing of a decision where you only show certain angles and you're trying to come to a certain conclusion. That's not how VAR should work, really. The referee should be able to make his calls. And if there's been an obvious error, which there wasn't an obvious error, there may have been a case in that game to say, look, have another look at it. But you must look from all angles. You can't just look from certain angles and be looking for one decision. You must be looking for all phases of play to see why we came to this outcome. There isn't that. I think there's a real problem. And it's down to the standard of refereeing in this game. We're not seeing these type of decisions made in different leagues around Europe, in different competitions around the world, but we're seeing them on a consistent basis. You just have to go to that Maxwell Cornet goal against Chelsea. No wonder David Moyes was so angry. There was no foul in that play. I'll even go back to, I know this one you might not agree with this one, Ali, but I'll go back to the Newcastle-Liverpool game at Anfield. And I've seen a Marcus Rashford goal given for Manchester United only a few weeks previous, which was on the exact line, or appeared to be, by the one showed, as what Alexander Isak's goal was, which would have made it 2-0. And you just never know what would have happened then. So it's one of these ones where, is it just bad refereeing? And I think it is. VAR is brilliant for me. I love VAR. I think it is the right thing to do. I would much rather us be talking about good decisions and making the right decision, even if it's against your team, knowing that that was the right decision and not having that controversy. The problem is now we've got extra layers, because we're now looking at referees saying you shouldn't be making these mistakes, but they're making just as many on a more consistent basis.
Yeah, absolutely, Liam. I agree with you 100%. That's why I was like quite happy with VAR when it first came in. And again, the point here is, even, like there's a lot of decisions that really anger fans, like takes too long, and, it's so, marginal and all that. But ultimately, if they are correct, that might be worth it. It's worth it. The problem is with these clearly wrong decisions, and what's really, really frustrating is so many of these decisions are easy decisions, like some of the West Ham one you mentioned, some of the Newcastle ones as well. These are easy decisions. Pre-VAR, these would not have been controversial. Like a referee would have probably just called it like onside and probably called it correctly. They're that obvious, like really obvious decisions. And it's not like it's not about wasting time. No, they're getting them completely wrong. It's almost they've abdicated, their responsibilities. VAR was meant to come in and add to the skill set of the referee, and it seems to have taken away. And like these decisions should be. Some of them are so obvious that VAR should not have to be even involved in it. The referee should say that and go ahead. But it's been taken to VAR, and as you say, they start showing you all the different angles and try to sort of justify a decision which was correct in the first place. Maybe.
Good point. Listen, we've got to look ahead, be positive. So Ali, I'm going to come back to you. Let's stay with you. Let's look at the opposition this weekend. We've already said that we would consider, with all due respect to them, that Newcastle will be looking for maximum points, Ali. They've had an up and down start, the Cherries. Great win at fellow promotion rivals Forest last time out. What will they offer us on Saturday?
To be honest, I think if Newcastle play the way they've been playing, which has been a pretty good level, I think Bournemouth obviously won't be as bad as like they were at Anfield. I mean, when they were pretty abject. They even made Liverpool look good. So it's like Liverpool going through a bad period looked great that day. No, it's I don't think. I honestly, as you say, you respect all teams and so on, but I do think Newcastle, especially if I'm not sure. Maybe Liam can shed more light on this. Like if Bruno comes back, Liam mentioned it earlier on. The difference he makes is huge. I mean, again, and it's a really good point he made that it would affect any top club. All the way to the top. I mean, look at Liverpool. Have had a pretty poor start to the season, and then in the European game they get Thiago back, and suddenly they look a different team. Someone who's pivotal right in the middle of that, which is the role that Bruno plays for Newcastle. I think if he comes back. Again, keep saying it like week after week, there needs to be, we keep talking about the strikers. I think Isak looks like a great striker. I think he will score. And I just think that, there does need to be help from other parts of the team. We mention it all the time. I think, maybe if Bruno's not there or Callum Wilson's not there and all that, it is important that other players chip in with their goals, and that's kind of been lacking, and that would be the difference between all those draws turned into wins, maybe games that you're not playing very well, but it's still 0-0 or it's still draw going into the last few minutes. You get that extra quality that Bruno brings, you get that extra quality that the top players bring, and maybe the one that Maximin and Almiron should be bringing more, and those draws get turned into wins.
You've been consistent with that, Ali, since the start of the season. It's something I wanted to ask Liam about as well. Liam, is there a sort of a feeling around the ground on match day, home and away, that the other players need to start chipping in? I mean, it's quite unheard of. We're not a fan base that's used to 0-0 draws, and whilst the clean sheets are welcome, the other players really need to step up, don't they?
You know what? It's weird because I don't think there isn't really much of a sense of that. I think it's really, really positive. I think It's hard to find any negatives. I think people are genuinely grateful that this Newcastle United team is actually producing the kind of performances that they have, having gone from Steve Bruce and even going back to the likes of Rafa Benitez, where it was really limited, blunt instrument stuff, where it was just hang on in games and hope you can catch on the counter. This is all very different. It's all very new. Newcastle haven't seen football like this for quite some time, and there is a real positivity. Look, I think if we go a few more weeks whereby wins don't come, I think there might be a little bit of sort of people start wondering, but I think there's a run of games Newcastle have now where you would hope they would start to pick up a few wins, and I think they will. If they just play anywhere to sort of 70-80% of the levels that they played in the last few weeks, they'll beat Bournemouth at the weekend, and they'll go on a little run where they'll win 2 or 3 because they have got that quality. I think one about Maximin and Almiron, very, very different players. St. Maximin's kind of turned up to the party a little bit this season in terms of his work rate, and his buy-in in terms of his defensive work has been incredible. We've lost a little bit of the forward work because of that. But before, obviously, he was out recently. Before that, he was excellent and scored that beautiful goal at Wolves. Was really gave. I've never seen Kyle Walker given the runaround that he was.
We said that on
City. It was incredible to watch. And I watched Kyle Walker come off the pitch at St James's Park, and in the press box, he looked up to his family who were behind us in the press box, and he sort of blew his cheeks out, and he was like,
got away with one.
Gesturing to his chest as if he was very tired after running backwards a lot. But Almiron's very different. And Almiron doesn't have that quality in the final third that Alan St Maximin has. And he's very close to adding goals to his game, but he just doesn't have that finish. But the way Newcastle are playing with this very, very high press and not giving teams any time on the ball, it's quite a selective press. Almiron is absolutely key to that. There isn't anybody with the legs. There's not many in the Premier League who can do a 60, 70-minute shift like Almiron does. It's incredible the amount of chasing and running he does across that front line. So it's funny because ideally you would have wanted to upgrade in that department, but these players are actually proving quite crucial to the system and the way that they want to play. But ultimately, if Newcastle want to move forward, they're probably going to have to upgrade on players like Almiron, potentially even Alan St Maximin as well, depending on what Alan St Maximin actually turns up.
Actually, I mean, Liam, just to go back on the point, I think absolutely it's because Newcastle are playing so much better. It's because, that especially Alan St Maximin against Manchester City, as you mentioned, was fantastic, and he has been a lot more consistent. Almiron, absolutely no criticism of him either. To be honest, I mentioned them because they happen to be the two front players, either side of either Callum Wilson or Isaac. But really, it's the point that I've consistently made to Pete and to yourself is that I just think, goals need to come from other parts of the team, and maybe under Bruce, I think it's because they're so much better now that maybe you expect like a little bit more help from midfield. And I'm sure, given a proper run, Bruno would chip in with a few, no question, But it would be, like just for those days when there's injuries, or not even injuries, not just like on a day where like Callum Wilson is not firing, or is like like somebody chips in from midfield, and like I said, all those draws which Newcastle have pretty like dominated, many of them, will become will go from 1 point to 3 points, And
one thing I do want to make quickly point is, I tell you where I think those goals could come from, and this is key. I was standing on the quayside, had a drink with Newcastle United's current captain, Kieran Trippier, on Saturday night just gone, and he did nothing but wax lyrical about Elliot Anderson. And he talked about the idea, young Geordie lad from North Shields, said he'd rarely seen anybody with the talent that he's got in the game. And that's quite an incredible thing from a 40, 50 odd capped England international who's played in Champions League runs to the final and things like that, and played at Atletico Madrid under Simeone, and England to World Cups and European Championships. And to hear that from somebody of his ilk, it was quite incredible. So I would say, fingers crossed, I think this will be, for me, the season that Elliot Anderson comes to the Premier League party, and that he probably will bring goals, because that's mostly what his game's about.
Very exciting seeing him as well, and he gives me the, I hate to say it because everyone does it, so I won't just yet, but there is a certain player that he reminds me of when he came on. Listen, let's hope, before I get your prediction from you, Liam. Let's hope that your Newcastle World stats do change around them, because they are, all of your marks are all for the defenders, which goes back to my point of saying that we need some more points from Alan St-Maximin above, because he's your player of the month according to your Newcastle World stats. But all the rest are defensive, Nick Pope. So let's change that around. Give us a prediction for the weekend.
For me, I would say I think Newcastle United will win, and I think they'll win quite comfortably, actually. I see a 3-0 win. Defensively, they've been really solid, and I think a few of those chances will hit the back of the net this weekend. So I'm quite confident Newcastle 3-0.
I don't normally give a prediction, but so much so, given if certain players are back, and I'll say if, I won't name them, but if certain players are back, I fancy Newcastle to click at the weekend, and I'm going one more. I'm going for 4. Last word, as always, goes to Ali Khaled. Let's leave it on a high, Ali. What do you expect on Saturday, and what's your prediction?
I'm gonna go with Liam on that. I think 3-0, and if he's picked to start, Alexander Isak to score.
Definitely. Can't wait to see that. Listen, we're just about out of time, so all that remains is for me to thank Liam Kennedy. Brilliant to see you. Makes me slightly jealous of standing on the quayside with the company that he was, but I love the quayside as well, so my heartstrings are pounding. Great to see you, mate. Thanks as always to Ali Khaled. We'll catch you next week on another episode of Black and White with Arab News. How are the lads?